tells me that it's more probably about politics than the actual letter of the law. And I think that will help the situation if a mom has another alternative to raising it herself. To have a two-state solution, you have to have two sides that want that solution. You could start oil exploration to see what is there. That would be an issue that he would be addressing as president. Is there another shoe to drop, something we don't know about? And if not, then why is he gone?
Let's get this straight right from the start. Government health care is not Christian. The latest salvo against Christians who are politically conservative is to charge in the most morally superior of tones that failure to continually expand welfare programs is in direct defiance of biblical teachings. This is true, of course, as long as you don't actually read the Bible. But the lack of truth rarely shows a political assailment, particularly against Christians who are politically conservative. So this quickly became an attack line against the healthcare reform program Republicans proposed in Congress last week. It wasn't the substance of the need to stem the bleeding of Obamacare. It wasn't the skyrocketing insurance costs the program incurred. It wasn't the all-important freedoms at stake that we spelled out in previously in the Revolutionary Act. It was this, best represented in a couple of tweets from CNN political analyst and USA Today columnist Kirsten Powers, retweeting one of her followers. Her follower tweeted, "We do not require religious readings to know that it is right for government to have compassion for the poor." To which Powers added, "This is true, and it's sad that so many people demanding scripture citations have an antipathy toward the poor. They are probably demanding those citations in relationship to the role of government, and in that, there are none to be found." Look, this is not a new line of attack. Many years ago, I was at a luncheon function sitting at a large table with others from the newspaper where I worked. As the speaker was walking up to the podium, the editorial page editor of the newspaper, an older liberal atheist man who knew I was both Christian and politically conservative, turned and said, based on Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, "I don't understand why all Christians aren't liberals." He then turned away toward the speaker as the program began, allowing me no time for response. That was purposely timed. I wrote him an extensive explanation, but he never responded, nor could I get him to engage when I saw him, because he did not really want a discussion or a better understanding. He wanted to take a cheap shot and feel smugly self-satisfied and move on. Many of the people saying that any opposition to government-funded or government-run healthcare insurance is unchristian are themselves not even Christians. Powers, to be noted, is a Christian. It's a dual-purpose attack line to score points for big government welfare programs among the uninformed while also taking a whack at RWRNs. That's social media slang for right-wing religious nuts. But they have an empty case on multiple levels, and that should be and can be knocked down vigorously. Let's take the Sermon on the Mount, as this is a favorite for those who skim the Bible and those who paraphrase it from others who have skimmed the Bible. The problem with the editorial page editor's cheap shot is that it is suffering from a fatal fallacy. Jesus teaches for 3 full chapters in Matthew on the deeper Christian life of joy and suffering and generosity towards others. In one portion in one chapter, Jesus says this, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets and hypocrites." He goes on to explain. It's in Matthew 6 if you want to check it out yourselves. He goes on to explain how Christians are to do it, and it looks nothing like government-run health care. Jesus is exhorting his followers to do it tacitly, humbly. No place in these 3 chapters or anywhere else in the New Testament does Jesus mention a role for government in his teachings. Further, he had plenty of opportunities to spell out a Christianized government role when talking to soldiers, centurions, Roman leaders, Pontius Pilate, and so on. And he stayed mum. Given his teachings that were always aimed at the responsibilities of the individual believer and not the government, and his choice to stay mute when given the opportunity to spell out the role of government, it seems more than likely that he was disinterested in government doing what individual Christians should be doing. There's an error in this idea of compassionate government. Kirsten Powers used the phrasing such as that. And the problem is compassionate government is an impossible combination. An entity such as government cannot have compassion. People can have compassion because it is a uniquely human trait. Anthropomorphizing government is a grave error leading to terrible policies, exactly what we've seen for decades. Government as an institution has a critical role, but it has nothing to do with compassion or love or anger or any other human emotions or traits. The government's primary role was meant to be the protection of human rights. That's why the very declaration separating us from a distant tyrant launches off with, well, let's just read it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. To secure these rights, that is life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted among men, not to do charitable good deeds. Government is meant to secure the rights of the individual and to protect them from intrusion by other individuals and by the government itself. Hence, we have a system of checks and balances within the government so as to keep itself in check, because by its nature, it is not compassionate. It was a machine designed by the founders to protect us from itself. Look, opposition to government health care is not hatred. Kirsten Powers used the word antipathy, which is synonymous with it. An American, whether Christian or not, can believe that X should be done and also think that it is wrong for government to do X. We can believe in helping the poor individually through churches and synagogues and other charitable organizations and oppose the government doing the same. It is not an either-or proposition. What we've seen is that when government fills this space, it displaces charities that would otherwise be doing the work, and it creates an entitlement mentality among those receiving it. Instead of gratefulness, an individual or a church or an organization, recipients see the gifts bestowed from the government as a virtual right. And if the gifts are not sufficiently large, they are angered and will protest for more. This alone is a bad sign for the soul. We spend $1.3 trillion every year on various safety net programs, and in return, we get deep familial dysfunction, the enablement of bad behavior, more debt that eventually we will not be able to pay off, and maybe as much as anything, we lock the poor into generational poverty and ingratitude. Opposing the system doing this is not hatred. In fact, it may actually be more loving and therefore more Christian. But politicians cannot take credit for such a system as that. Only when ladled by their generous hand can they take credit and secure future votes, accomplished by forcibly taking money from others and giving it to those. There's no love in any of that. There's nothing virtuous about giving other people's money to the poor. In fact, if you want to go to Scripture, Jesus has a few harsh things to say about just such grandstanding. We cannot outsource our moral obligations. Shifting responsibility to the government is a pathway for us to feel relieved of any personal duty to help those in need. For many, merely advocating for more money to go to the poor proves their compassion and moral superiority. Nothing could be further from the truth. Conservatives tend to want a system where there is minimal welfare, just enough to help people get back on their feet. The institutional variety we have now breeds ever more welfare and robs people of their self-worth, making them comfortable living in poverty and in handouts. That is not loving, and it is certainly not Christian. So any biblical case for Christians being required to support government health care and other welfare programs is DOA if we actually read the Bible. I'm Rod Thompson for The Revolutionary Act. For more, visit therevolutionaryact.com.